Hello everyone, how you doing? It's Diamond G, Big G, Greg Lightner, and
And I'm Richard, in case anyone wondered.
that's right.
No nicknames involved,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
we're working on that though.
Working
We're
on
working
that,
on that. So, today's topic, we chose to engage in was a discussion on campus, about the American Negro, and we had a very enlightening experience. And when we talk about the American Negro, we're talking about what is considered the subculture within the black community as a whole. And to be fair, what we did is that we asked several different people, blacks, so-called blacks from this country, some from abroad, and we also interviewed two other Caucasians, one male and one female. And we just got a good feel, and we learned a lot. I myself, I was really blown away by some of the revelations that were revealed. And let's get started. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, we found we asked questions based on what it means to be black. We asked about the pressure that fellow black people feel being black, because there's a black stereotype, and most of the time you seem pressured and confined to behave in a certain way. You know, using ebonics and etc. All that, and we want to touch on some current events like the Trayvon Martin case that happened, what, a year ago, 2 years ago?
Yeah, we asked about that, and we posed a couple of different scenarios based on facts that were not commonly disseminated by the media. So it was really interesting to see the different types of responses. So we're going to get right underway here. At the conclusion, we'll each give our personal feelings about, the American Negro and the subclass within the so-called blacks and the division within it, and how it's affecting how everyone outside of the community, the so-called black community, is. So what's going to happen here? Richard's going to talk about, he mentioned the questions and the response, and then I'll talk, at length a little bit about what we learned from it, and share our experiences.
All right, let's
do it.
Yeah, show on the road. So, first we interviewed a group of two black ladies. One of them was from Charlotte, North Carolina, so she's a black American. And the other one, her name, the one from Charlotte was called Taylor. And we had another girl called Lynn, and she's from the Virgin Islands in the Caribbean. So it made for an interesting dynamic to see how different people from different places would respond to the questions. So we started off asking them what it meant to be black, and their responses were fascinating to say the least. I know Taylor was saying that to be black, there isn't really a certain type of black person, as in everyone should be labeled as being black. So Caribbeans, Africans, there shouldn't be any sort of discrepancy or discrimination towards that. In saying that, she mentioned in her interview that she has friends and is also associated with a lot of Africans on campus, and she agrees with all of them when they say that the term African American is one that doesn't pertain to them and one that is very misleading. In other words, she just wants everyone to be called black because that's what our skin color is, and that's how it should be. For Lynn, she wanted to propose a justification for the African American term, as in she agreed with Taylor, but she kind of gave a response to why this term is thrown about, due to the fact that our ancestors all came from Africa. So in a way, the term African American would refer to the fact that even though we're born American, we still have African blood in us, which is true of black people in general. Lynn also touched on the American Negro and their differences with the typical black person, and she felt strongly about the acts and the attitude of the American Negro. She felt that the American Negro gives blacks a bad name due to their behavior, their attitude, the way they carry themselves about.
Right.
And
Let me
she,
touch on that real quick, Richard.
right.
So, and this was very fascinating because the term American Negro was not a term that she was ever familiar with. She said that there have been other things that they've been called, and she said you just realize that there's a huge difference. And the biggest problem that she said she had was the fact that she was facing a lot of pressure, and a lot of discrimination from within the, saying so-called black community by these uneducated individuals. And the fact that they told her that because she worked hard and she wanted to go to school, she was trying to act white, because she spoke quote unquote proper English, she wasn't black anymore, and it was really interesting because while we definitely agreed on certain things within the dynamic. The other very interesting thing was when talking about identifying as black. Now we got two different answers on what it meant to be black, and I think that was predicated upon basically background. You had what was her name, Lynn?
Lynn, yes.
Yeah, you had Lynn. She's from the Virgin Islands, and she said that it was never really an issue because people of color, it's not like they're sitting around there like, hey, we're black, but they're just people, and they all look alike. So it was never really an issue for her. So education, it was not a situation where anyone was getting any less quality education. You did what you were supposed to do, and that's the way it was supposed to be. Now with what was her name?
Taylor.
With Taylor, she talked at length. I mean, you could really see it in her face. You could see the pain in her face when she was talking about, the fact that education has been devalued in the community, and it's so much so to the point where she doesn't have many, quote unquote, black friends. And we talked a little bit more about how those of us who are educated tend to gravitate towards one another, and how difficult it is to combat the ignorance that's been perpetrated on us in society.
Right. We also actually question, if there is some sense of pressure, some sense of expectation of being black. And I'm sure Big G and I knew the answer to that already, based on our experiences. But Taylor mentioned that there is indeed pressure. Big J was talking about recently. He told me that he was surprised at that due to the fact that it's not really much of a surprisement, but it's much of a fascination because the pressure of being black comes with the fact that you're afraid to make a mistake, and if you do, you be labeled as that black person is screwing around and stuff. So it was good to hear that people do feel that. The black people do feel that sort of anguish and pressure when around.
I'm gonna talk expand on that a little bit more too. I was very fascinated, and it's really ironic. I've been on this earth for almost 37 years, and I have never heard the type of expression from Taylor. I've never heard that from a woman of color before, and she talks about the pressures, of not wanting to fail, and how every time something goes wrong, everybody turns to look at you. Now, as a quote unquote so-called black man, I've felt that and dealt with that pressure all my life, and I've never really giving it a second thought about, how that pressure would affect a woman of color, a so-called black woman. And it was really sad because it was for her, she was experiencing and expressing the exact same things that I had to deal with and I was going through. And it really made me feel sad, and it's just, I told her, I'm very proud of her, Lynn, and there was another young lady there.
Her name was Jody.
Jody, yeah,
Yeah.
and Jody, yeah. Richard knows everybody, but
What can I say?
yeah, and I told them I was really proud of them in the way that they're, carrying themselves, and it was just really, really impressive for me. So I learned something today, and I was like, wow, just kind of blown away by it.
Right. Linda mentioned that despite the fact that living in the U.S. she feels pressure, back home in Virgin Islands where she lived, there was no pressure, and that makes sense because there is no concept of let's say Virgin Island Negro because the culture in the Virgin Islands is different and socialized in that everyone is the same and there are no discrepancies between the subclasses of black people. So for her, she didn't really feel that any pressure at all when she was in the Virgin Islands. But she does admit that because of UT's racial breakdown, you often have classes where there aren't many blacks in them, and you're surrounded by whites and other races. And she does feel a bit weird in our place when surrounded by intimidated when being around people from other race. Because again, she's used to the lifestyle of being around fellow Virgin Islanders all the time. And Taylor made a little rebuttal to that, in that once because of your character, you tend to get used to the fact that you're around Caucasians and other races, most of the time, due to the fact that your character may not necessarily be the same as the American Negro, so naturally you gravitate towards other races. Although she did say that she does tend to feel uncomfortable around other races when talking about sensitive issues,
Race.
It's just race.
Yeah, race, and if so-called black, aka the American Negro, commits a crime, she feels immense pressure and feels very uncomfortable because she said that it's like everybody turns to her and asks for an explanation for all black people.
Right.
She said that she didn't feel it was fair because when a so-called white person does something wrong, no one turns around and says, hey, all white people did that. And that's interesting because I've felt that way for quite some time, and it was just really sad, me and Richard, we talk about these things, about our experiences, and we know they're not isolated, but the big thing here is that we're on this campus here, and it's a relatively comfortable place, but there are a lot of educated people here on this campus. So we all pretty much have the same type of mindset, when it comes to things, and that's one thing I was grateful for. They were able to share this with us, and without feeling any type of pressure or anything else.
Yeah.
Move on.
Lynn went on to say that again, being black, you shouldn't have to, feel the responsibility of what others, the American Negro does. You shouldn't have to feel as if, what they do is what you do as well, and that, their mistakes are your mistakes, because she mentioned that everyone has their flaws.
Right.
White people make mistakes, Black Americans, Native Indians, everyone has their flaws, and everyone is prone at some point to do stupid things.
Right.
So, with using that logic, you shouldn't, feel guilty that, someone of your race is, doing stupid, heinous things outside, which, we can all agree with in the end. She mentioned the breakdown of blacks on campus.
Right. That was very very interesting.
It was, yeah. I actually had a rebuttal to that because she mentioned that the blacks on campus tend to be in cliques. They all tend to, stick together. Um, and I have noticed that to some degree because I know there's Black Student Union and there are other fraternities which are exclusively black.
Right.
But then I mentioned, well, I happen to have mostly non-black friends. So in a way, I guess it's interesting how that dynamic works out. That you still see a presence of cliques, even though it's supposed to be a diverse and multicultural community here.
Right. Yeah. And the thing about it, when we were talking about that, my explanation for that is that University of Tampa is a microcosm of the world. In particularly, it's a certain segments of it is a microcosm of America, where there's a lot of self-segregation and self-denigration. We talked at length about that. We'll get into that a little later on about skin color and the ignorance that goes on with that. But we were talking about how people break into these different groups, and the saddest thing was that they were saying how they did this really nasty act. Lynn's like they're sitting there, they look at you sideways, you try to say hello, they look at you in a threatening and hostile manner. And they let you know that they don't want to accept you, they don't want to speak to you. And it was interesting because we told Janet and Lynn that they weren't alone in experiencing that. As it turned out, later on in our second interview, the second part of our interview that we did, one of the guys that me and Richard had talked to one day when we were showing a couple of students on campus just how ridiculous it is when dealing with the so-called American Negro and the way that they act towards other blacks that they perceive as different from them. And I told us again, it's not an isolated incident, but I can definitely understand their reservation, and she said it was just really sad because we should all, no matter what part of the world we come from, we should all be able to have at least a minimal amount of respect for one another, and that's what she said, when you try to, reach out, show some respect, they take it and kick you in your back basically, and we were just blown away by it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move on a little bit.
Yes.
We might need to skip.
Yeah, let's skip a little bit. Yeah, we can skip it.
Let's see. Okay. They both Lynn and Taylor. At this point, another female came in. Her name is Jodie. She's from Trinidad, and they all contributed into an interesting discussion about skin color and how. There seems to be discrimination based on a shade of black, which I find ridiculous. I actually didn't know about that until they mentioned it, which is interesting. They're mentioning the fact that, for example, light-skinned blacks tend to be better looking than darker skinned blacks and tend to be smarter. Basically, everything's in favor of lighter skinned blacks, and I find that preposterous. And of course, they concurred, saying that everyone is the same and that stereotypes just don't matter at all. And I mean, it's really pointless, and it relates to how you seem to see black on black discrimination. Right. In other words, I feel as though when you're confronted with the typical American Negro and you seem to be a black person who is contrary to the attitude portrayed by American Negro, you tend to be given that sort of disrespect and that sort of attitude that you usually find in encountering American Negroes, which again is just uncalled for and very disappointing, given the fact that we're all the same in a sense, and it's more or less racism. And another thing is that this relates to another topic that we had about whether blacks can actually be racist or not, right? And whether the fact that we're always being, the fact that blacks tend to be under scrutiny due to the fact that they're always discriminated against, is it possible for us to do the same thing?
Supposedly.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was really something. It was really nice because during this interview, we were able to build with these young ladies as well. I pulled their coats to some things. We were talking about the differences with skin color. I shared with them a story about from 1996 when a friend of mine, a girl who was my best friend in high school, got jumped on at Howard University and nearly got beaten to death because she was dating a dark-skinned football player and she was light-skinned, and they had basically clicked up based on skin color. And it was really a pathetic situation because I was actually told that had I gone there with my brothers, all three of us got different skin color. We look identical, but we all have different skin color, that we wouldn't have even been able to hang out. We would have gotten jumped. And it's really pathetic that now here, over 20 years later, and that type of thing is still being perpetrated on our young people. And it's so sad because they're talking about like, there's different things that are assumed about light-skinned blacks. And I was like, I've heard it all. One is, oh well, is your wife white? They automatically assume that I'm dating a white woman or I've married a white woman. And then it's like, oh, okay, you think you're better than us. We hear that all the time. And the fact that we're educated is also another problem. So in addition to the fact that so me and Richard are sitting here, and we already discriminated against by the quote-unquote American Negro because we're trying to better ourselves. We're moving forward. We're not doing anything that anybody else, that any other person who's trying to better themselves is doing. But on top of that, we now have to deal with discrimination based on our skin color, and that's not coming from outside of the so-called black community. That's from inside. And that's what we shared with Jody and Lynn and Janet. Is her name right, Janet? Taylor. I'm sorry. And Taylor. I told them, I said, don't feel like this is something that's isolated. They're talking about how people be like, oh, okay, well, you're light skinned, you're better looking, and all that. And then we just had a good laugh on it. So we've been dealing with that as well. And the big thing was that it's like of all the things that people have to deal with, and especially with them as women, they're also catching it because they're women on top of it. And it's hard when you're running a race, you're running the same race that every other person of color is running, but you're worried about being attacked from behind you, not from what you're trying to accomplish in front, but you're worried about what's coming from behind you. And we were just blown away by it. It was pretty awesome.
We have more topics that we covered in the interview, but I think for time restraints, I might want to move on to the next.
We're 23 minutes.
Okay,
so about half an hour should be good.
Anyway, so we also interviewed two individuals. They were both Floridians, Caucasian. So guy name was Austin, and there was a girl's name Jane. So we asked them similar questions when we asked the previous group of people we interviewed. We wanted to change up the questions a little bit to fit, what we're trying to get from them. So we asked them about whether they believe there are different classes of black people. So that would lead us to then assume that they believe there is indeed an American Negro.
Right.
And Austin was pretty defiant in his response that the difference is clear, and just by observing the attitude of different individuals, and again, education is key. Those who are well educated tend to have more open-minded views about race in general, about all sorts of social issues. And we also touched on whether which class of black people they're more likely to engage with, and they all mentioned they were more likely to be engaged with the more educated.
Yeah,
so
specifically, they said that they would, people like myself and Richard you know, and it's interesting, you know, how this came about. We went over to sit down and talk to him, and then I recognized Austin as one of the guys from a little exercise that me and Richard did when we were doing a class assignment where we had to go outside and just talk to people, just
At random.
yeah, and you know, talking to him, that's what his big thing was. He's like, the way you guys approach us, he said, you're just cool. He's like, you guys are just, like anybody else. He's like, we'd love to hang out with you. And that's the same thing that, what's her name, Jane or Janet?
I think it's Jane.
Yeah, that's the same thing that that Jane said as well. She was like, I love to kick it with you guys and hang out with you guys. I'm like, yeah, that's cool, But what we got to was that, yes, what I'm saying, there are, it's not just, blacks or so-called blacks who see this, and that was a big thing. We had the two of them, and they both Floridians, both Caucasians, identified themselves as white, and they recognized it as well. And they said that, yes, they would be feeling intimidated should they come across those individuals. Said that they're more inclined to just stay away from them because they know there's a potential for an issue. Like they're not going to walk up to them and say, hey, how you doing? Because they feel already that there's going to be some sort of negative response that comes out of that, simply by the way that individuals are carrying themselves. So we found that really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see that everyone seems to have this clear identification of the middle class and black, the black culture and the black demographics. Anyway, we also
one other thing to piggyback on that. It's also that also goes to show where we are as a society, where we have evolved as a society. When you have individuals that can recognize, what historically has been just a blanket cast over a particular group of people, and they can say, hey, look, yeah, we know that there's differences, and it's literally classed just like what we have in our own community. That's a beautiful thing, though, because that means that we've made a lot of progress in these years. So that was actually a bit surprising, because I've been a big proponent of stating that race in America has gotten worse within the last few years. But they basically, talking to them, I kind of backed off that position a little bit.
Yeah. Moving on, we also talked about the Trayvon Martin case
Yes.
of a couple years ago, to see a perspective on how fair the whole trial was, the results, and they took offense at what George Zimmerman did. Instead of obeying what the police said and standing down, and instead perceiving him as a threat just because of his skin color, because of his appearance and all of that. They thought that was uncalled for, because you can't judge, the old saying applies, you can't judge a book by its cover. So in the same way, you can't judge a person by their appearance, by their demeanor. And they mentioned the fact that everyone's liable to threats, that anyone could be a suspect. So basically, what Judge Newman did was just really uncalled for.
And we had also, it's funny because we touched on this with the other group as well, and that was a universal theme. And I brought about the fact about with how George Zimmerman was portrayed as Caucasian, and the effect that had on so-called Caucasians. And I said, how'd you feel about that? Because there was such backlash and such a negative reaction to white people, because of this whole mess. And come to find out, George Zimmerman was not Caucasian. He was what they now terming a white Hispanic, which doesn't exist. It's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
But and they were like, yeah, that did cause some problems for him. And I said, well, then let's take it a step further. And we talked about the way that the media portrays racial issues in America and how that affects them. And they said that they felt that it was very unfair, the way that the issues are being portrayed. And we concurred with that as well. It's almost like there seemed to be an effort to basically start something when there's nothing there.
Yeah, exactly. And we also moved on to discuss the affirmative action law. In case, to forget the background, it's a law which applies to colleges and other institutions to allow minority races to enroll and apply and usually get in over other more qualified individuals. This is just to promote the whole racial diversity that many colleges endeavor to create.
Right.
The only problem is that, for example, you can have a situation where you have, let's say, a Hispanic person decides to apply. Well, not Hispanic. A white Caucasian decides to apply, and he or she has a 3.7 GPA and was involved in sports and was in student government and had a complete portfolio which he or she could have applied to the school. Then you got the American Negro, to use that term again.
We'll call him Mr. X.
Mr.
Yeah,
Perfect,
call him
yeah.
Mr. X, yes.
So then you got Mr. X applying, and he has a lower GPA, and he doesn't have the sort of background and the sort of qualifications that is required to go to such a study institution. But instead, he'll be picked over the Caucasians simply because he's of different color. And we asked Austin and Jane if this is fair, and they said it definitely isn't, because to go to an institution, you must have the right set of qualifications. You must earn it, because if that Mr. X, if he gets into Princeton and he's not well prepared for it, he is still a failure, because he doesn't have the qualifications, and because of Princeton's academic rigor and its intensity, it's just not going to work out for him at all. And as a result, the person who had a 3.7 GPA and who was basically a rock star would be left in the dirt. And this is another thing that we concur with as well.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting, because we talked about we constantly harp on the ideal here about there's a lot of common themes going on here. There seems to be some ridiculous misconception and notion that all people of color, so-called blacks, are in favor of affirmative action, and any white, who says that they are against it is a racist. That's one thing that's difficult to overcome. And we talked about that, and I shared my experience with them, and my reasonings for why affirmative action has failed, and it was funny because while we were talking, you had Jane who chimed in. Basically, she's finishing my sentences, and we were talking about how, affirmative action, the way it was brought about was really, it was, like jokes on America at that point, because there were already laws on the book, but they were not being enforced. And we were saying the same thing. Like if there's a person who's supposed to that applies, and they are the most qualified individual, they should get that job no matter what their race is. And the fact is that one of the biggest flaws of affirmative action that we talked about was the fact that you'll have your regular list, and then you'll have your affirmative action list. Your affirmative action list is going to have reduced qualifications, and they allow for someone to get into the program who otherwise wouldn't qualify. Now, what that would actually in turn do, that person is going to fail out. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where people say that, okay, blacks aren't smart enough to be at this school. Well, look here, we did affirmative action, and this individual bombed out. I believe the statistics are somewhere, actually via the Princeton Review, ironically enough, I believe the percentage of individuals who go in under affirmative action into a school program, the graduation rate is somewhere around 11%. Think about that. 11%. And it's because not even the most qualified black is being selected, you know, just the person who they believe is most needy. You know, that's why they ask the different questions they do, like, oh, you know, are you the first one in your group to go to college? You know, and the family to go to college. And you know, we looked at that, and it's funny. And, you know, everybody sees it. You know, even the situation like we talked about the American Negro, they just nobody had a name for it. You know, they didn't have a name for it. They were like, yeah, we know what that is and what that type of black person is. You know, and but everybody is aware that there's a problem. So now it's a matter of getting it out there. And when we were talking to Austin, he was able to be very honest and candid because of the rapport that he had with myself and Richard from before. He knew that he could speak his mind freely, and then Jane followed suit and did the same exact thing because they know what type of demeanor we have and what our motivation here is. You know, and that was really critical. You know, on that.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, that's our interviews. I mean, we had more topics we could discuss, but of course we have. We've already used a lot of time, so.
Yeah, we're close to the 40-minute mark,
Yeah.
so we're gonna give some closing remarks. Richard.
All right. So yeah. So we endeavored to discuss, you know, the American Negro, who they are, why they matter, and what the problem is. So before we went on our escapade to interview fellow students, I already had my own preconceived views on this subject. And of course, I'm from Ghana, as most of you know. And you know, in Ghana, because the society and the dynamic in Ghana is very different to what have noticed and experienced in the U.S. This concept of the American Negro was alien to me because in Ghana, everyone had the same sort of work ethic, the same sort of attitude, the same sort of demeanor. So to hear that, you know, there are actual subclasses of black people surprised me, and it also saddens me the fact that with because whenever you have a stratification of a race into different classes, there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be discrimination. There's always going to be some level of hatred attached to that. And it adds an irony too, because you know we had a civil rights movement in the '60s, and you know, as you all know, blacks were oppressed and were segregated. So why then do we have to turn that sort of policy to our own kind, to our own race? It's uncalled for. So now that I'm in the U.S., the differences between different subclasses are clear, and unfortunately, you know, it's uncalled for. It should not happen. We should all, you know, be the same. We should all treat each other the same. Going around town and going around the service areas, even around the university, you often, you know, as a non-American Negro who is black, you often get, you know, little dirty looks from American Negroes. You often get attitude dished out to you because you are someone who they don't want to be. You're someone perceived to be as a threat. You're someone who is also perceived in some corners to be superior to them, and they don't like that. They're given a sort of inferiority complex towards that, and you know, again, it's just sad why and how this happens. So, in a nutshell, you know, this whole concept of the American Negro existing, you know, is really flawed, and you know, it just should not happen. And you know, I hope, and you know, I'm being optimistic here in saying this, that you know, one day we can all realize that you know, there's no need for this segregation of people in our own black race. That you know, we're all equal. You know, we should all have equal respect towards each other, equal standing in social settings, and what have you. So, you know, that's my wish that this changes in the next few years. I'm unfortunately, I don't see it happening, but you never know. So that's my say on the issue.
Yeah, that's very, very, very eloquent, Richard. That was, you hit on all cylinders, and I'm in total agreement as well. This project really, really changed my dynamic as a thinker, and it was very, very good, to be able to engage people in some serious conversation. I mean, we're not talking about, us just basically asking a couple of questions. I mean, obviously, we condensed this, but I mean, we had some like really serious, discussion to the point where, people said that they had places to go and then changed their mind while we were sitting there. They wanted to sit there and wanted us to keep talking, it was just great for them to be able to really bond. And they said that, that it was just really nice to know that, that we're here, and I told them, I was like, hey, there's a lot more of us here, but what we have to do, we have to stick together, if we stick together, that's how we can overcome ignorance. And I told them, I said, I'm not, the bottom line is I've had some negative experiences with the so-called American Negro here on campus. I've shared a lot of those with the class. There are others that I have not shared with the class, but it comes with the territory. I was telling the young ladies that, the type of vehicle that I drive and, how I dress and my demeanor, it's all 110% me. And, I'm not intimidated nor am I threatened by the so-called American Negro. And if they don't want to speak to me, that's not a problem either. It's not going to change who I am, but it's good to know that their days are numbered. That's the way I'm feeling about it. Just like Richard was saying, we may not see it in our lifetimes, but there's so many more people as a whole. We're not just talking about so-called blacks. We're just talking about everybody. More human beings are getting on board with the concept of, how to, being educated. And we're not just talking about book sense here. We're talking about being educated about your history. Find out where your bloodlines come from. That eliminates about 90% of all bias, because at some point or another, there are those of us who have some sort of, different quote-unquote race running through our blood, and all you got to do is just look around and you see people, you have, like my son, he's dark, and he's got red hair. He doesn't like his hair growing out because his hair is reddish brown.
Natural red hair?
Natural red hair.
Oh, okay.
But what I told him, what ended up happening, he keeps it cut short, but he was worried about that because he was worried about what the other little quote-unquote black kids were going to say to him at school. But I said, listen, your grandfather had fire red hair. When he died, all his hair was completely red and grown out. You have an uncle, my little brother, who's got fire red hair. When I grow my beard out, it grows red. That's part of who we are. I said, so we need to be proud of our heritage and proud of everything that encompasses us, and reach out to everyone and share our core similarities, the things we have in common, and that's where we're at. So it's an uphill battle. The ladies were very impressed with our discussions, and I think that when Richard is away in Texas, I'm gonna have to have him chime in on some videos for me, give some commentary on Diamond G Speaks.
Yeah, definitely.
On YouTube.
I've heard that.
Yeah, and that's what we need to do. And it was just great. For us to be able to do this. And the only way we can combat these people is that, you can't change everybody. A bigot is a bigot is a bigot. That's just what it is. Bigots come in all shades and colors. We talked about that as well. For some reason, it's overlooked a lot within the so-called black community. But if someone is going to discriminate against another person within their own race, it's going to follow suit that they're going to be discriminatory outside as well, and that's what we need to see. We need to see a baseline established where discrimination is discrimination, period. Affirmative action, you can catch my next video on that. It's going to be very deep. I vehemently oppose affirmative action, in all shapes and forms, and it's, we just need to get beyond that. you know, and can't level you never level the playing field, you know. That's something that's unrealistic, but you know you can do what you can to turn basically a mountain into a molehill, if you will, you know. So it was really awesome, you know what I'm saying, and that's gonna do it for us. And thank you for watching.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right. Yo, dog. Exactly 45 minutes. We ain't even gonna have to speak during class.
We need to cut. We need to like show snippets of that. I don't think we'll have a lot of time to do that unless maybe there's one day where wait.
Oh, it's still going.